Make yourself comfortable, and let's unravel this elegant puzzle together. And if you'd like, leave a quick comment and tell me where you're joining from. It's always a pleasure to know where our little detective community is tuning in from. Let's get started. It was one of those peculiarly quiet evenings at our shared flat, where the silence hung so thick in the air that even the gentle clink of Poirot's teacup against its saucer seemed disproportionately loud. Outside, London was smothered in a late autumn fog, and the dim yellow street lamps cast hazy glows against the windows. The fire in the grate crackled softly, and Poirot, wrapped in a robe of impractical silk, was engaged in the meticulous trimming of his already impeccable moustache. I was slouched in my armchair, leafing restlessly through the evening paper, though I hardly read a word. After several minutes of desultory silence, I let out a loud sigh, one that was calculated to provoke a reaction. Poirot, however, continued his grooming ritual, utterly unmoved. "Dash it all, Poirot," I burst out at last. "I can't recall the last time we had a proper case. Not so much as a misplaced pearl or a suspicious butler has crossed our path in weeks." Poirot's gaze flicked to me in the mirror's reflection. "Patience, mon ami," he said, his voice as smooth as his carefully oiled moustache. "The crimes, they are like the rain in this country, inevitable. They will come." I grunted, unconvinced. "Meanwhile, I suppose we are to sit here like a pair of retired schoolmasters, waiting for trouble to knock politely on the door." "Exactly so." Poirot's smile was maddeningly serene. "And if experience teaches us anything, mon cher Hastings, it is this. Trouble, it rarely sends an invitation first." At this pronouncement, the doorbell rang, a crisp, deliberate chime cutting through the stillness. Poirot's eyes gleamed with mischief. "You see? It arrives, comme toujours, precisely on time." The prospect of a visitor, especially one with urgent business, cheered me considerably. "At last!" I exclaimed, leaping to my feet. "Perhaps it's a client, Poirot. Something thrilling, I hope. A jewel theft, a missing heiress, a poisoner at large." Poirot held up a hand. "Control yourself, Hastings. One does not leap to conclusions like a frog in a pond." "But surely," I argued, "a caller at this hour is bound to have a case for us. It's always at night when the most sinister business occurs, isn't it? That's what the novels say." Poirot gave me a look of fond exasperation. "You read too many of those cheap thrillers, mon ami. Real crime, true crime, has no sense of drama. It occurs at the breakfast table, during the afternoon tea, in broad daylight, and it is often committed not by criminal masterminds, but by the clumsy hands of the desperate." I frowned, for this did not suit my sense of romantic adventure at all. I'd still prefer something a little more atmospheric, a haunted abbey, or a locked room mystery, perhaps. "And I," said Poirot serenely, "prefer a case that challenges the little grey cells. One can find such cases anywhere, even in a modest lavender envelope." "A what?" I blinked, but Poirot was already rising to answer the door. The envelope Poirot retrieved from the hall table was an elegant affair, thick, high-quality paper, faintly scented, and tinted the palest lavender. My excitement grew, for such stationery spoke of wealth and drama, perhaps even a touch of scandal. Poirot examined it with a certain reverence, running a fingertip over the embossed edge. "Curious," he murmured. "This paper, it is not merely expensive, but of a style rarely seen outside of certain old families. There is a deliberate choice in its selection." I peered over his shoulder as he slit it open with a paper knife, extracting a single sheet covered in fine, slanting handwriting. "Monsieur Poirot," it read. "A matter of grave importance requires your attention. A young woman, an heiress, is missing from Chiswick House under the most peculiar circumstances. It concerns a clue, most unusual, linked to Candlelight itself. Time is of the essence. You will understand all when you arrive." There was no signature. I stared at Poirot. Candlelight clue. What on earth does that mean? Poirot's expression grew inscrutable. It means, Hastings, that someone wishes to be both cryptic and poetic, a poor combination for communication, but an excellent one for intrigue. And Chiswick House, that's the old Welford estate, isn't it? One of those grand mansions with more corridors than sense. Just so. Poirot folded the letter precisely and tapped it against his palm. Come, Hastings. I believe the adventure you crave has arrived, and I assure you, it will be most illuminating. Poirot held the lavender envelope between two fingers, tilting it this way and that, under the warm light of the sitting-room lamp. His eyes narrowed, not in suspicion of the contents themselves, but rather at the manner in which the letter had been folded. You observe, mon ami? He said without looking at me. See how the edges align, not merely folded, but pressed with precision. This is not the casual fold of a harried messenger or a solicitor's clerk. No, this is the hand of one accustomed to fine things. It's just a folded letter, I said, bewildered. People fold letters every day. Poirot gave me a glance laced with affectionate pity. Non, Hastings. This is no ordinary letter. It speaks of lineage, of breeding. Such folds, they are like the calling card of old families, particularly those of a certain class who cling to tradition. Even in secrecy, they leave their mark. I could not see how the simple way a piece of paper was folded could reveal anything of substance, but Poirot's little grey cells were already off at a gallop, leaving me far behind. So, you think this comes from someone connected to one of the old houses? Perhaps one of the great estates? Poirot raised a finger. Not perhaps, mon ami. Certainly. The paper itself, the lavender scent, the handwriting, all deliberate choices. This is a family with a certain view of its own importance, and thus our destination is clear. Chiswick House, I murmured, catching up at last. Once Poirot had made up his mind, there was no swaying him. Within minutes, he was instructing me to prepare for immediate departure. I scrambled to find my coat, while Poirot calmly selected the perfect pair of gloves, an absurdly delicate pair for such a dreary evening. Are you certain we should go tonight? I asked. Surely the family would be more receptive in the morning. Poirot gave a little sniff. Mon cher Hastings, crimes do not wait for polite hours. And besides, the urgency of this letter, it speaks of desperation. To delay would be to waste the precious time. But all we have is a letter and a cryptic mention of candlelight, I protested. It could be nothing. Poirot wagged a finger at me. Ah, non. A letter such as this, so carefully composed and deliberately vague, is the work of someone who fears both what they know and what they do not. This, mon ami, is the essence of intrigue. With that, he swept his hat from the stand, adjusting it to a mathematically perfect angle, and marched to the door. I could only follow, my pulse quickening at the thought of what awaited us. Before we could step into the hall, a faint rustling sound stopped Poirot in his tracks. A small slip of paper had been pushed under the door. Poirot bent to retrieve it, and I saw at once it was not from the same hand that had penned the lavender letter. This one was on plain, unremarkable paper, cheap, almost crude, and the writing was sharp, hurried, with none of the grace of the first message. Yet its content was chilling in its simplicity. Beware the man with the silver tie pin. I felt a sudden chill. What the devil does that mean? Poirot's expression was one of satisfaction rather than alarm. You see, Hastings? Already the plot thickens. But who could have sent this? And how would they know we were even considering the case? Poirot tapped the side of his nose. It is not for us to ask how the wind knows when to blow, but already the atmosphere, it has changed. We are no longer merely investigating a disappearance. We are walking into a tangle of secrets, mon ami. Poirot drew himself up to his full, if modest, height. This, he said, his voice rich with theatrical gravity, is no ordinary case. It is a case that calls to the very core of Hercule Poirot. He gave his moustache a final, reverent stroke. We are summoned, not merely by duty, but by destiny. I couldn't help but smile. And what does destiny say? Poirot opened the door with a flourish. She says, "The game, it is afoot." With that, we stepped into the night, and I knew, whatever lay ahead, boredom was no longer on the cards. It was nearing midnight when our hired motorcar pulled up at the grand iron gates of Chiswick House, its dark silhouette rising ominously against the clouded sky. A narrow gravel drive led through an avenue of ancient oaks, their branches clawing at the mist like spectral fingers. Even I, who had seen my fair share of stately homes, felt an unaccountable chill at the sight. Poirot, by contrast, seemed entirely at ease. He sat primly beside me, adjusting his gloves with meticulous precision, his gaze sweeping over the house with the air of a man inspecting a painting for symmetry. "You observe, Hastings," he said, "a house of much grandeur, but little joy." As we stepped into the marble-floored hall, the atmosphere was one of confusion and distress. Uniformed constables stood awkwardly near the staircase, while a housemaid, red-eyed and trembling, hovered in the background, wringing her hands. A harried inspector, whom Poirot recognized at once as Inspector Hudnall, was attempting to impose order, though with limited success. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," Hudnall said, his relief palpable. "I was not aware you'd been summoned." Poirot smiled. "Summoned, no. Invited, yes. You have found no trace of the missing Mademoiselle Welford?" Hudnall shook his head. "Not a sign. Vanished into thin air during her own party, if you can believe it." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Vanished into thin air. Non. Into thick suspicion. Yes." The inspector, accustomed to Poirot's peculiar way of speaking, merely grunted and gestured toward the drawing room. "The family is inside. A rum lot, if you ask me." Poirot gave his coat a final straightening. "Come, Hastings, let us meet these roomiers." The room into which we were shown was large and lavish, though its current occupants added little to its charm. The Welford family, along with a handful of guests, sat in various states of disarray, faces pale, tempers frayed, and distrust thick in the air. Poirot's keen eyes swept across them, and I could almost hear the whirring of his little grey cells. Sir Giles Welford, Venetia's elder brother, stood by the fireplace, his posture rigid, a tumbler of brandy clutched in one hand. His face was lined with tension, and his gaze darted frequently toward the door, as though expecting either salvation or catastrophe to enter at any moment. Beside him, perched stiffly on a chaise, was Lady Honoria Welford, Venetia's stepmother, a woman of formidable bearing. Her carefully set hair and expensive pearls formed a sharp contrast to her air of fragile composure. Near the window stood Mr. Lionel Chase, the family solicitor, nervously polishing his spectacles. There was a damp sheen upon his brow, though the room was far from warm. Finally, slouched in a chair with a sort of rebellious defiance, was Miss Lillian Grant, Venetia's closest friend. Her dark eyes glinted with something I could not place, resentment, perhaps, or fear. Poirot inclined his head courteously to the room. "Messieurs, mesdames, I am Hercule Poirot, and I am here because, as always, the truth, it insists on being found." With that pronouncement, an uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Poirot's gaze flicked from face to face, and I knew that, in his mind, the investigation had already begun. Sir Giles Welford stood at the mantelpiece, brandy in hand, his posture one of strained confidence. He had the air of a man accustomed to command, but there was something brittle about him, like a structure weathered by too many storms. Poirot advanced delicately, his hands clasped behind his back. "Sir Giles, may I trouble you for a few moments? You will forgive, I hope, the inquisitive nature of Hercule Poirot." Sir Giles grunted, as though granting an audience to a minor court official. "I assume you're here to join the circus of suspicion. Well, I'll save you some trouble. I know nothing of my sister's disappearance. Poirot's smile was polite, but his eyes were keen. Mais bien sûr, that is what they all say at first. And yet, his gaze swept the room. There is a curious thing. You stand by the fire, but the sweat beads your brow. The air, it is not so warm, no? Sir Giles scowled. That's none of your business. Ah, but it is. You see, monsieur, the guilt, it leaves traces. On the hands, in the voice, in the glances that flicker without reason. For example, you glance repeatedly toward the sideboard. Why? Giles's jaw tightened. It's habit, and this is ridiculous. Poirot moved to the sideboard and ran a finger along its polished surface. Here stood the family's ancient silver candelabrum, yes. Giles' face turned pale. I suppose so. Curious. It was moved recently, non? There was no answer. Poirot's voice softened. Tell me, Sir Giles, how deep are your debts? The glass trembled in Giles' hand. That has nothing to do with it. On the contrary, mon ami, it has everything to do with it. When one stands to inherit a fortune if one's sister vanishes, one might see opportunity in tragedy. Sir Giles slammed his glass down. I didn't harm Venetia. Poirot bowed slightly. Of course not. But harm and profit, they are cousins, yes? Lady Honoria Welford received us in her private sitting room, a room filled with chintz, lavender sachets, and a heavy perfume that clung to the air like suspicion itself. She sat upright, her hands folded so tightly the knuckles gleamed white. Poirot inclined his head politely. Lady Honoria, I am most grateful for your time. It is difficult, I know, at such a moment. Her smile was tight. I imagine you will be asking the same questions the police already have. I have little to add. Poirot seated himself, folding his hands in his lap. Permit me, madame, to ask not about the crime, but about Mademoiselle Venetia herself. You were close. Lady Honoria's eyes flickered. As close as one can be to a stepdaughter. And yet she confided in you, non? The lady stiffened. Confided? I hardly think... Ah! Poirot's smile was small. But you see, madame, I understand there was some, how shall I say, delicate knowledge Venetia came to possess. Her face froze. What are you implying? Poirot's gaze sharpened. An affair, perhaps. One that could ruin a reputation if exposed. The silence stretched. Lady Honoria's lips thinned. That is vile speculation. Poirot's voice softened. But it is not speculation, madame, when the whisper comes from Venetia herself. A letter exists, does it not? Lady Honoria rose abruptly. This is intolerable. Poirot's expression did not change. You see, madame, the truth. It has a way of emerging, no matter how tightly the door is closed, if Venetia threatened exposure. I did not harm her. Lady Honoria's voice was sharp with panic. I may have wished her silenced, but that is not the same. Poirot rose gently. A curious choice of words, madame. Mr. Lionel Chase sat in the library, his hands twisting his handkerchief into knots. He was a thin man with a nervous air, like a schoolboy caught cheating at exams. Poirot approached with the grace of a cat stalking its prey. Monsieur Chase, I am most curious about your last conversation with Mademoiselle Venetia. You were seen speaking near the candles, yes. Chase swallowed hard. I was merely asking if she had the documents she promised me. Legal papers. She said she would hand them over at the party. Poirot leaned forward. And yet, she did not? No. Chase dabbed at his forehead. She gave me this. He pulled from his pocket a crumpled slip of paper, slightly singed at the corner. It was a sketch of a candle. Poirot's brows lifted. How intriguing. And the meaning? I haven't the faintest idea. Chase's voice cracked. And then, this morning, I found this. From another pocket, he produced a silver tie-pin. It's not mine. It was slipped into my coat somehow. Hastings muttered beside me. Planted evidence, if ever I saw it. Poirot's smile was faint. You see, Hastings, some clues scream while others whisper. This one whispers too loudly. But who would do such a thing? Chase wrung his hands. I have no enemies here. Poirot's gaze sharpened. That, monsieur, is precisely the problem. You do not need enemies to become entangled. Sometimes, all it takes is being in the wrong place, by the wrong candlelight. Miss Lillian Grant sat with a posture that could only be described as defiant, her arms crossed tightly, her chin raised just a fraction too high. I had encountered that stance before, in officers who knew they were under suspicion, but resented it all the same. Poirot, unbothered by her prickly air, gave a graceful bow. Mademoiselle, it is a most unfortunate circumstance that brings us together. Lillian's dark eyes flashed. Is it? Everyone's acting as though Venetia's some saint who walked on air. But you wouldn't think that if you knew her. This outburst caught me off guard, but Poirot merely inclined his head. Ah, the emotions. They betray much, do they not? You were close friends, non? Lillian gave a harsh laugh. Friends, until she stole my fiancé right from under my nose. Rupert Cavendish and I were practically engaged, and then Venetia. She broke off, her lips tightening. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And so, you followed her that night? Lillian paled. Who told you that? Mais non, Poirot said softly. It is not told, it is felt. You see, mademoiselle, jealousy leaves fingerprints on the heart. I followed her, Lillian admitted at last. I wanted to warn Rupert, to make him see what she really was, but I lost her in the crowd. Poirot gave a gentle nod, as though comforting a child. And so the anger subsided. No, Lillian said bitterly. But I didn't hurt her, I swear it. She was already gone when I reached the terrace. Poirot rose, his expression unreadable. Merci, mademoiselle. You have given me much to consider. As we walked back to the main hall, I couldn't hold my tongue any longer. It's a hopeless muddle, Poirot. Every person in this house seems to have reason to dislike Venetia. Just so, mon ami, Poirot agreed, though his tone suggested he did not find this discouraging. But you see, it is not the motive alone that interests me. It is the mistakes. And already, there are many. He ticked them off on his fingers. First, the silver tie-pin, belonging to Sir Giles, found in the pocket of Monsieur Chase. A curious game of hide-and-seek, n'est-ce pas? Planted evidence, I suggested. Perhaps. Or perhaps a message. Then, we have the shadow. What shadow? The footman, mon cher Hastings. He observed a shadow, moving silently near the ballroom candelabra just before Mademoiselle disappeared. But who casts a shadow at a masquerade? Anyone, I said. That doesn't tell us much. On the contrary. Poirot gave a sly smile. A shadow that draws attention is no shadow at all. It is a performance. Before I could ask what that meant, Poirot stopped abruptly by the garden door. And lastly, the candle. What candle? Poirot pointed to the table where a solitary candle lay, snapped clean in two. It was found in the garden maze. But why would a candle from the ballroom find its way outdoors? I shook my head, completely baffled. It's absurd. Absurdity, mon ami, said Poirot, is merely logic in disguise. It was a footman who stumbled upon the candelabrum during our tour of the house. Hidden behind the servants' staircase, the ornate silver piece had been cast aside as though someone meant to hide it, but lost their nerve halfway through. Poirot knelt beside it with reverence, his fingers tracing the intricate craftsmanship. The Welford candelabrum, he murmured. Magnificent. And yet. He lifted one of the arms, where streaks of hardened wax clung stubbornly to the silver. The candles, they dripped most extravagantly. See here and here. Hastings, the dutiful narrator that I was, could not see anything beyond mere melted wax. All candles drip, I said. Ah, Non. Poirot wagged a finger. Not like this. You observe the pattern. It is irregular, almost as though the wax fell deliberately. Deliberately, I repeated. But why would anyone? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Let us think, mon ami. If one wished to send a message, and yet feared to write it plainly, how better than to let a candle whisper in wax? The idea was so utterly bizarre that I could only gape. Poirot, on the other hand, seemed positively delighted. But what does it say? I asked. Poirot rose, his hands carefully folded. That, Hastings, is the question for the little grey cells. As we returned to the drawing room, Poirot paused at the threshold and glanced back at the discarded candelabrum. A candle that drips its secrets, he murmured, is a candle that tells no lies. I frowned. What does that mean? Poirot merely smiled, that infuriating, all-knowing smile that always preceded the moment when I felt particularly dim. Patience, mon ami. The light may flicker, but the truth, it will burn bright in the end. With that, he swept into the room, leaving me trailing behind, once again hopelessly in the dark. The morning at Chiswick House dawned with a sense of suppressed tension, the sort that settles over a household when polite smiles are merely masks for suspicion. The Welfords and their guests gathered reluctantly at Poirot's request, and as I watched my friend prepare, I could not help but admire his method. There was no police-like interrogation, no bellowing threats or accusations. Poirot operated like a surgeon, delicate, precise, and relentless. He began, as always, with the gentle art of disarming conversation. "You will forgive, mesdames et messieurs," he said, folding his hands with exaggerated humility, "if I ask questions that seem, how shall I say, trivial. But you see, the truth, she is a creature who hides in the folds of ordinary moments." This was Poirot's great trick. He lulled people into a sense of safety, only to expose their nerves with the slightest tug of his rhetorical thread. To Lady Honoria, he inquired about her preference for Earl Grey over Darjeeling, a question which led, somehow, to the matter of who last saw Venetia near the drawing-room candles. To Miss Lillian, he posed a question about Venetia's choice of dress for the party, which prompted a tangential rant about the ethics of stealing suitors. I could hardly keep up. Poirot's questions seemed, at first, absurdly irrelevant. But I had seen him work this magic before. Each innocent inquiry led, step by step, to something uncomfortable. An awkward pause, a fleeting glance, a hand tightening on a teacup. He spoke with Mr. Lionel Chase about legal matters and candle duty during the party. Apparently an odd tradition of the Welford family, where an unmarried man was tasked with ensuring the candles stayed alight all evening. Chase had performed this role, and now seemed to regret the honour. When the suspects were dismissed, I turned to Poirot in exasperation. "You didn't ask a single direct question about Venetia's disappearance." Poirot smiled serenely. "Ah, mon cher Hastings, the direct question, it alarms. The indirect one, it exposes. And already, I know who fears what." Sir Giles was waiting in the billiard room when Poirot entered, his stance aggressively casual, though the tight grip on his cue betrayed a different story. His drink, untouched, trembled faintly on the table beside him. "Sit, mon ami," said Poirot pleasantly. "I am no billiard player, you see. The angles, they confuse me." Sir Giles gave a bark of laughter, but there was no humour in it. "What do you want now, Poirot? You've already poked around enough." "Ah," Poirot said lightly, "but the poking, it is my art. Like the sculptor with his clay, yes?" Giles scowled. "I've told the police everything. I was in the study most of the evening." "Most?" Poirot's head tilted bird-like. "Not all?" Giles' brow furrowed. "I stepped out for air once or twice." "Ah, for air." Poirot reached into his pocket and withdrew a small fragment of silver wax, which he placed delicately on the table. "Perhaps you saw this during your stroll?" Giles's gaze flickered involuntarily to the sideboard, where the ancient silver candelabrum once stood. Poirot followed his glance with quiet satisfaction. You see, Sir Giles, Poirot said softly, I have a fondness for candles. They are revealing. No. Giles' hand tightened around the cue. What are you getting at? Poirot's voice was gentle. Merely that candles, when moved, they leave evidence, little splashes of wax like breadcrumbs in the dark. I don't know what you're talking about, Giles snapped. And if you're accusing me of harming Venetia… No, no! Poirot raised a hand. I accuse nothing. I observe. And I observe that a man who insists on his innocence should not sweat so profusely over a simple question. Giles's face darkened, but he said nothing. As we left the room, I asked Poirot if he believed Giles was guilty. Poirot's reply was maddeningly vague. Guilty of something, mon ami. But whether it is the crime we seek, that remains to be seen. Lady Honoria Welford was waiting for us in her boudoir, seated rigidly on a velvet chair by the window, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her rings cut into the flesh of her fingers. She greeted us with a brittle smile, the sort a hostess might wear when she suspects her guests have come to appraise the silver. Poirot, ever the master of courtesy, bowed low. Madam, I thank you for your time. It is not easy, I know, to relive an evening so fraught with distress. Lady Honoria gave a small, controlled laugh. Distress? I dare say it has been more inconvenient than distressing. Venetia is a girl of impulses. She's probably sulking in some hotel, waiting for the drama to ripen. I thought this a curious way to speak of one's stepdaughter's disappearance, but Poirot only smiled faintly. Such wisdom in family matters, madame. You see, I am often asked if families hide secrets. But I say, non, families do not hide secrets. They decorate them, like a Christmas tree. Lady Honoria's smile faltered. I assure you, there are no secrets in this house. Poirot's eyebrows lifted. No? And yet, you would be surprised how often a secret stands right beside a candle. Her hand, delicate and well manicured, froze upon the arm of the chair. I beg your pardon. A candle, madame. Poirot's voice remained light, almost conversational. Mademoiselle Venetia, she was seen speaking with Monsieur Lionel Chase by the candelabra, just before she vanished. Such an interesting choice of companion, non? Lady Honoria's face blanched, her composure cracking like thin ice. Lionel? Why on earth would she speak with Lionel? Ah! Poirot leaned forward slightly. You knew of the matter between them, then? Her fingers trembled against the fabric. Matter? What matter? Poirot's gaze sharpened. A certain letter, perhaps. One that might complicate relationships. She rose, knocking over a small vase as she did so. This is absurd. If you are implying that Venetia blackmailed me… Poirot's voice was gentle. I imply nothing, madame. I observe only that your reaction tells me far more than your words. Mr. Lionel Chase was not difficult to find. We discovered him pacing the length of the library, his spectacles slipping repeatedly down his nose, his hands wringing at a handkerchief that appeared to have suffered greatly under his care. He started when Poirot entered, as though half expecting an executioner. I swear, I've told the police everything I know, he burst out, before Poirot had even spoken. Poirot, entirely unperturbed, settled into a chair. It is always so interesting, mon ami, when someone says they have told everything. It usually means they have told everything that benefits themselves. Chase's Adam's apple bobbed. What do you want from me? Poirot's gaze flicked briefly to the silver tie-pin lying on the desk beside him, a small, elegant object with the Welford crest. This, for instance, it was found in your coat pocket, was it not? Yes, and I have no idea how it got there. Chase's hands twisted the handkerchief into ever tighter knots. I didn't even know it existed until this morning. Poirot gave a faint smile. And yet, someone wished very much for you to possess it. A curious gift, no? Chase sank into a chair. It's ridiculous, I spoke to Venetia by the candelabra, yes, but only because she summoned me. Ah? Poirot's head tilted. And what was so urgent, monsieur, that she summoned you? Chase reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small, crumpled slip of paper. She gave me this, said it would explain everything. Poirot took the paper with great care, smoothing it out. On it was a simple sketch, a tall candle with melted wax dripping down its side. Nothing more. Hastings peered over his shoulder. What on earth does it mean? Chase's voice was strained. I thought it was some sort of joke. But then she vanished, and this tie-pin appeared, and I realized I was being set up for something. Poirot stood, folding the paper carefully. Non, monsieur, you are not set up. You are invited. Invited? Chase looked bewildered. Oui, invited into a game where the candles speak louder than the guests. Miss Lillian Grant was summoned to the smaller morning room, a place Poirot seemed to have selected deliberately. It was a delicate space, fringed chairs, pale wallpaper, and the sort of atmosphere one associates with whispered secrets rather than loud confrontations. She arrived stiff-backed, chin raised in defiance, but her fingers clutched at the fabric of her skirt. I have long learned to recognize Poirot's subtle method of dismantling a suspect's armor, and he began at once, not with accusation, but with kindness. Merci, mademoiselle, for coming, he said, as though inviting her for tea. I know this is unpleasant. She gave a brittle laugh. I suppose you want to know if I killed Venetia. Poirot shook his head gravely. Non, mademoiselle. I want to know if you were honest. With yourself. Her bravado wavered, and she sank into a chair. I hated her, she whispered. Is that what you want to hear? I followed her that night. I thought I might catch her doing something disgraceful. Poirot inclined his head, his voice soft but relentless. And why, mademoiselle, would you wish to catch her so? Lillian's hands twisted in her lap. Because she took Rupert Cavendish from me. He was supposed to propose to me last year. But then Venetia, with her wealth and her beauty, she swept in and ruined everything. And so you followed her? Yes. Her voice cracked. She slipped out through the side door, and I went after her. I thought, if I could catch her in some scandal, I could show Rupert what she really was. Hastings, unable to restrain himself, asked the obvious question. And did you catch her? Lillian shook her head. She was already gone by the time I reached the garden. I swear, I never saw her again. Poirot's voice remained mild. You saw no one? No shadow moving near the candelabra? Lillian's brows drew together. The only person I saw was Sir Giles. He was pacing near the terrace, muttering to himself. Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. Merci, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful. As she left the room, Poirot smiled faintly. When jealousy guides the feet, it rarely sees the truth beneath them. The next hour was a masterclass in what Poirot called the art of psychological peeling. With every suspect questioned, the comforting fiction of airtight alibis began to unravel like an old tapestry, loose threads everywhere, none connecting quite where they should. Sir Giles insisted, for example, that he spent the majority of the evening in the study, drafting letters and reviewing the estate's accounts. But the footman, a reliable man with no personal stake, recalled seeing Sir Giles wandering near the ballroom candles at nearly midnight, muttering and rubbing his temples like a man debating with his own conscience. Lady Honoria's alibi was equally threadbare. She had stated confidently that her maid, Edith, was with her most of the night. Yet, under Poirot's calm questioning, Edith revealed that she had fallen asleep in the linen room after drinking a suspiciously strong punch served at the party. Poirot merely smiled when Hastings remarked on the coincidence. Then there was Lionel Chase, whose story hinged upon leaving the ballroom early due to a headache. But two separate guests remembered seeing him lurking near the servants' staircase long after he claimed to have retired. As for Lillian Grant, Her confession of having followed Venetia outside was corroborated, but her insistence that she saw no one else conflicted sharply with the account of a kitchen maid, who distinctly recalled seeing a shadow moving toward the servants' wing just minutes after Lillian returned inside. It was a bewildering knot of contradictions. "It's a hopeless tangle," I muttered, pacing the hall beside Poirot. "Everyone is lying, but none of them seem to have actually committed the crime." Poirot gave a delicate shrug. "Mais oui, mon ami. It is a tangle. But you forget. Tangles only exist when the truth is deliberately knotted. We must ask ourselves, who benefits most from confusion?" He tapped his temple, his eyes glinting. "The guilty, Hastings. They weave their stories like a spider spins her web, not to hold the truth, but to trap the innocent who stumble too close." Despite his confidence, I felt no closer to understanding the mystery. But one thing was certain. The walls were closing in, and the truth was beginning to flicker, faintly, like a candle in a draught. I have long prided myself on being a reasonable man. I may not possess Poirot's near-supernatural powers of deduction, but I flatter myself that I can follow a logical path when one is laid before me. On this particular occasion, however, I was beginning to feel that Poirot had not so much laid a path as scattered breadcrumbs into a howling gale. We were seated in the library after his morning of interviews, and I could stand it no longer. "Poirot," I began, attempting a tone of patient inquiry, "what exactly have we accomplished? Every suspect has lied in some fashion, every alibi has collapsed under pressure, and yet we seem no closer to finding Venetia or to understanding what happened." Poirot steepled his fingers, gazing at me with maddening serenity. "Mon ami," he said, "you make the mistake, the most English of mistakes. You want the facts to march in a line, like soldiers on parade. But the truth, Hastings, she is a dancer." This poetic flight did little to soothe my temper. What possible dance involves silver tie pins, misplaced candles, and a solicitor who collects mysterious sketches instead of proper evidence? Poirot gave a small, satisfied nod. "Just so. You have noticed the irregularity. Bravo, Hastings. You are improving." "I'm no closer to understanding it," I protested. "Sir Giles sweats like a man caught in a lie. Lady Honoria behaves as though she's hiding every scandal since the Wars of the Roses. And poor Lionel Chase looks ready to confess to anything if you stare at him for longer than 10 seconds. Poirot smiled. The sort of smile that infuriated me most, a smile of quiet triumph, as though all the answers were lined up neatly inside his head. Excellent observations. And yet, mon cher, you see everything, but observe nothing. That was the final straw. What on earth does that mean? Poirot rose, adjusting his cuffs with the precision of a man preparing to meet royalty. It means, Hastings, that the answers are all there, shining like candles in the dark, but you, my friend, have been dazzled by the light, and so you miss the shadows. If this was meant to clarify anything, it failed completely. As we left the library, Poirot paused beside the tall silver candelabrum, now returned to its rightful place on the sideboard. He ran a fingertip delicately along the polished stem, his expression one of almost paternal fondness. "Mon ami," he said softly, "candles, they are most instructive." "How so?" I asked, still bristling from his earlier riddles. "Think of what a candle does, Hastings. It reveals, but only what stands directly before it. Everything beyond the flame, it remains hidden." I frowned. "That's true enough, but what of it?" Poirot tapped the candelabrum gently, and the wax from the previous evening's party, not entirely cleaned, flaked onto the polished wood. "When the light is too bright, mon ami, one sees only what one is meant to see. But if you look at the edges, at the very fringes of the glow, that is where the truth hides." I stared at him, entirely lost. "And that's meant to help?" Poirot gave his most mysterious smile. "In the end, Hastings, it will help you very much indeed." As always, he was infuriatingly confident, And as always, I hadn't the faintest idea what he meant. It was Poirot himself who insisted that the final confrontation take place in the grand dining hall, under precisely the same conditions as the night Venetia Welford vanished. The staff, bewildered but obedient, had laid out the room exactly as it had been during the masquerade ball, candelabras flickering, curtains half drawn, and the long mahogany table polished to a mirror-like sheen. The suspects, Sir Giles, Lady Honoria, Lionel Chase, and Miss Lillian, were seated around the table, a curious blend of defiance and apprehension in their faces. Each knew, in their own way, that they were under suspicion, but none could yet divine exactly how much Poirot had discovered. I stood to one side, notebook in hand, determined not to miss a word. Poirot, resplendent in his evening attire, fussed briefly over the angle of his napkin before addressing the assembled company. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "I have brought you here this evening not to accuse, but to illuminate. Like these candles that flicker so charmingly, the truth has been both visible and obscured. It is time, enfin, to clear away the shadows." The candles cast long, wavering shapes on the walls, giving the entire room a ghostly quality. Sir Giles shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and I noticed that Lionel Chase kept wiping his hands on his handkerchief, though they were not visibly damp. Poirot moved to the head of the table, where Venetia's place had been set on the night of her disappearance. "This," he said softly, "is where our story begins." But as with all good stories, it was not the beginning we were shown. He paused for effect, fingers delicately adjusting the cutlery in front of him. "It is, you see, a story of deception, but not the grand, theatrical deception one expects in novels. No, no. This was a family deception, the kind woven from small lies told over breakfast, half-truths exchanged in hallways, and silent agreements made beneath the weight of old silver." He looked at each of them in turn. "Tonight, mes amis, I shall reconstruct the crime as it truly happened." The candles flickered once, as if on cue, and the room seemed to collectively hold its breath. Poirot cleared his throat, a sound far more deliberate than necessary, and raised a single finger in the air. I had seen this gesture before, his signal that the grand unveiling was about to begin. "The night in question," he began, "was a night of candlelight and masks, of champagne and whispered conversations. But beneath the glitter, there was fear. One among you was afraid that a long-held secret would be revealed." He took a step forward, his shoes clicking softly against the parquet floor. This fear was not born from guilt over a single crime. No, no. It was a fear fed by years of misdeeds, small betrayals, secrets hoarded like treasure. His eyes landed briefly on Lady Honoria, who paled slightly, but Poirot moved on before she could protest. "Each of you has lied. Of that, there is no doubt. Alibis have crumbled, motives have surfaced, and every candle in this house has told its tale." He paced slowly around the table, pausing to glance down at Sir Giles' trembling hand, Lillian's clenched fists, and Lionel's perspiring brow. "And so," Poirot continued, "I ask you, mes amis, why does a family with so much to lose choose candlelight instead of electric brilliance?" He let the question hang, his voice dipping almost to a whisper. "Because candlelight does not only reveal, it conceals." With that, Poirot stepped back to the head of the table, clasped his hands neatly together, and gave his familiar, cat-like smile. "Now, let us strip away the shadows, one by one." Poirot turned to Sir Giles, who sat stiffly at the table, his fingers drumming an uneven rhythm on the polished surface. The candles flickered, casting shadows across his face, accentuating the tightness of his jaw and the beads of sweat that gathered at his temple. "Sir Giles," Poirot began, his tone almost sympathetic, "it is no easy task to maintain a house of this grandeur. The roof, she leaks. The servants, always they need paying. And the land, it produces less than it once did." Giles gave a curt nod. What's your point? Poirot clasped his hands before him. The point, mon cher, is this. Your financial situation. It is not merely uncomfortable. It is desperate. Debts, mortgages, creditors knocking at the door. All of this you have concealed behind a facade of inherited dignity. Every estate faces hard times, Giles muttered. Ah, mais oui. Poirot's finger shot into the air. But not every estate comes with a sister, a wealthy sister, an heiress who controls a trust that could have saved you had she chosen to do so. Giles' mouth twisted. Venetia had no intention of helping me. Just so. Poirot's voice softened. And so the mind. It begins to calculate. If Venetia were to vanish, her fortune would eventually pass to her brother, would it not? Giles' knuckles whitened. This is outrageous. But you see, Sir Giles, this is the truth. The staged disappearance, the vague hints of a romantic elopement. These were not the acts of a woman in love. They were the desperate invention of a man drowning in debt. I didn't kill her, Giles snapped. Poirot bowed slightly. I do not say you killed mon ami. But you saw opportunity, and when opportunity knocks, a man in debt does not question too closely. Without pause, Poirot shifted his attention to Lady Honoria, whose composure had been fraying steadily since the gathering began. She sat rigid, her lips pressed so tightly together that they had almost disappeared. Beside her, Lionel Chase stared fixedly at the table, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Lady Honoria, Poirot said softly, the relationship between a stepmother and a stepdaughter, it can be complicated, n'est-ce pas? Lady Honoria's smile was brittle. Venetia and I had our differences, certainly. Indeed. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Particularly after Venetia stumbled upon your affair, an affair with none other than Mr. Lionel Chase. Lionel's head jerked up, his spectacles slipping down his nose. That's absurd. Is it? Poirot's brows lifted. A respectable solicitor, working closely with the family's affairs, often in Lady Honoria's confidence. It is not so unusual, but for Venetia to discover such an indiscretion, that would have been inconvenient, no? Venetia had no proof. Lady Honoria's voice cracked. Ah, madame, but she did. Poirot held up the sketch of the candle. This, you see, was her clue. Her way of saying she had seen you both by the candlelight on the terrace. Your hands too familiar. Your voices too soft. The silence was suffocating. Lionel's hands trembled. We only wanted to distract her that night, to keep her away from Sir Giles's plot. We didn't mean for her to disappear. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And so you conspired, a dance of candlelight and whispers, to mislead Venetia into believing you supported her plan to elope. You sent her notes. You planted the silver tie pin to confuse the trail. Lady Honoria's shoulders sagged. We thought if she believed Lionel was her ally, she would confide in him, and we could manage her. Manage? Poirot's voice grew sharp. You do not manage the truth, madame. You only delay it. Poirot stood before the candelabrum. His eyes narrowed as he studied the delicate wax drippings that had formed on its surface. The room had grown unusually still, the weight of the moment hanging over us like the heavy scent of a storm. I had noticed the wax earlier, but it was Poirot who had observed the subtle pattern it formed. An irregular series of marks, some faint, some deep, that suggested more than just the casual mess of melted candle. Mon ami, Poirot said, turning to me with a gleam in his eyes. You have seen it, have you not? The message concealed in the wax. I stared at the candles. A message? Poirot? I'm afraid I don't follow. Poirot smiled, that infuriating, knowing smile. But you do, Hastings. It is all there, like a puzzle waiting to be solved. You see, when a candle burns low, it does not simply drop wax at random. No, its drips form shapes, shapes that speak if one knows how to listen. I bent closer to the wax, but I was still none the wiser. What do you mean? This just looks like a mess of melted wax. Poirot's lips twitched with amusement. It is a mess, yes, but also a message. Look here, Hastings. The wax. The way it falls. These drops, they are not simply accidental. They form a code. A code, I repeated, intrigued despite myself. Poirot gently traced one of the patterns with his finger. This, mon ami, is no ordinary accident. This is Morse code, Venetia's way of telling us something. When she saw the candelabrum, moved from the ballroom to the servants' staircase, she must have known that the light, the wax, would reveal her secret. This, then, is her clue. I frowned. Morse code? But what does it say? Poirot's smile deepened. What, indeed? The question is, what did Venetia wish to tell us? She planned to elude her own family, to vanish under the cover of darkness. But she feared the truth. And so she left us the only clue she could, hidden in plain sight. He lifted his eyes to the gathered company. I have no doubt that this was Venetia's plan. But it was foiled, not by a stranger, but by the very people she trusted most. As Poirot continued to speak, I felt a sudden shift in the atmosphere. The room grew colder, the tension mounting with each word. And then, as if on cue, Poirot turned his gaze toward Lillian Grant. She had been quiet until that moment, her fingers clenching the edge of her seat, her eyes downcast. Poirot's voice softened. Mademoiselle Lillian, you have remained silent. But the truth, it must come from you now. Lillian started, her face pale. I don't understand. Her voice trembled as she looked up at Poirot. You were the last person to follow Venetia that night, Poirot said gently. But what happened after you followed her, mademoiselle? What did you see? Lillian's lips quivered. I didn't see her after that, she said quickly, but there was something in her voice that betrayed her. I swear I didn't hurt her. Poirot stepped closer to her. You did not wish to hurt her, but your jealousy, it clouded your judgment. You were consumed by it, and in that moment of madness, there was an accident. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, and I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. What accident? I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. Poirot looked directly at Lillian, his eyes piercing. The candelabrum, mademoiselle. It was you who moved it. It was you who knocked it, causing it to fall. The wax, the blood, both were left for us to see, but the truth was hidden in the shadows. You thought she had run away. You thought she would be safe. Lillian's face drained of colour, and her voice faltered. No, I didn't mean to. I never meant to. Poirot's voice was calm, but there was a finality to it. You struck her with the candelabrum. You knocked her unconscious, and in your panic, you thought to stage her disappearance. You were afraid of what she might say, afraid of her knowledge of your past, of your secret. Lillian crumpled, her hands shaking. I didn't want anyone to know. I didn't want anyone to find out what we had done. Poirot's voice softened, but his words were cutting. Your jealousy, mademoiselle, it led you to think only of yourself. But you see, Venetia's disappearance was not a plan of hers. It was your mistake, an accident born of anger and fear. The room fell completely silent as the realization struck everyone at once. Poirot's gaze lingered on Sir Giles as he sat, stiff and pale, still clutching his drink as though it were the only thing holding him upright. But Poirot, I could see, had already laid the groundwork, and now he was ready to reveal the true nature of the calculated cover-up Sir Giles had orchestrated. You see, mon ami, Poirot said, his voice full of quiet intensity. The truth, it was hidden beneath layers of deception. Sir Giles had every reason to want Venetia out of the picture, but his plan was not one of violence. It was far more insidious. Giles, his face twitching with nervousness, seemed to anticipate what Poirot was about to say. I don't know what you're talking about, he muttered. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. You thought to exploit the confusion, Sir Giles. The confusion created by the disappearance, and the chaos surrounding the missing heiress. You used it as a perfect cover to frame Monsieur Lionel Chase for the crime. I could see the realization hit Sir Giles like a blow. His hand trembled, spilling a few drops of brandy onto the table. No! You have no proof. Poirot's face remained composed. Ah, but I have proof, Sir Giles. You, monsieur, led us to believe that Lionel's tie-pin had been planted in his pocket by someone else, but you neglected one thing, the garden maze. It was there that Venetia's body was concealed, hidden in plain sight. When the confusion grew too great and the suspicion on Lionel too strong, you took the opportunity to remove her body, bury it in the maze, and create a perfect illusion of her disappearance. Sir Giles shot to his feet. You're mad! I didn't kill her! Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. No, monsieur, but you let fear and opportunity guide your actions. The panic that night, the shifting shadows, the movement of the candelabra, the misplaced wax, these are all part of the plan you wove, one that would shift the blame to another and conceal your own guilt. Sir Giles faltered, and I could see the desperation in his eyes. Poirot had him, cornered, exposed, in a trap of his own making. Poirot's eyes sparkled with quiet satisfaction as he turned to face the remaining suspects. Now, we come to the matter of the second letter, he said, his voice carrying the weight of a final, damning revelation. The one that warned of the man with the silver tie-pin, I said, piecing it together. We all thought it was a threat from the murderer. Poirot gave a small, knowing smile. Ah, Hastings, you think as everyone else has thought. But the truth, it was far simpler and far more clever. That second letter, it was not written by the murderer at all. It was written by Venetia herself. I stared at him, my mind racing to process this new twist. Venetia? But why? Because, Poirot explained, his voice gentle, Venetia knew of the plot against her. She suspected that her family would turn against her. The silver tie-pin was a symbol of trust, something she knew Sir Giles could not control. She warned us all, without us ever realizing it. It was a brilliant move, I had to admit. Venetia had laid the groundwork for her own disappearance, knowing that the letter would provide a clue to her fate. And yet, even in that moment of danger, she had shown far more cunning than any of us had expected. Poirot turned back to the candelabrum, his eyes tracing the shadows it cast across the room. You see, Hastings, it was never about the candles themselves. No. He smiled, a wry, knowing smile. The candles, they were merely a tool. What truly mattered was how the candlelight obscured the truth. I frowned. Obscured? I don't follow, Poirot. What do you mean? Poirot stepped forward, gesturing toward the grand chandelier above. The candlelight, Hastings. It was never the revelation. It was the distraction. When the lights flickered, when the shadows shifted, it allowed Sir Giles, Lady Honoria, and Lionel to move unseen. The maze of shadows covered up the real movements, the real actions. I could see where he was going. You mean, what happened in the garden wasn't an accident? Exactly. Poirot's voice was almost triumphant. It was by design. The shadows hid the truth of Lillian's actions, just as they concealed the true nature of the crime. Venetia's plan to elope was twisted by the people closest to her. Their own jealousy and fear obscured everything. The real crime, Poirot explained, lay in the hidden truths, the ones concealed in the candlelight, the ones the shadows had kept from view. And now, at last, everything was illuminated. Poirot's final words echoed in the room, and I could feel the weight of his reasoning settle over us all. You see, mes amis, he said softly, this was never simply a crime of passion or of greed. This was a psychological web spun from the threads of guilt, fear, and jealousy. He looked at each of the suspects in turn, his gaze unflinching. Each of you was driven by something, the fear of exposure, the need for money, the desire to keep control over Venetia. And in this, you created a shared illusion of crime, an illusion that deceived even you. Sir Giles, Lady Honoria, and Lionel all sat silent, the weight of Poirot's words pressing down on them. Their motives, once hidden, were now laid bare. "And the one who suffered most from all this?" Poirot asked. It was Venetia herself, caught between family loyalty and the need to escape. And in the end, she paid the price for their mistakes. I felt a pang of sympathy for the girl who had been caught in this web, a girl who had hoped for freedom, but found herself trapped in a tangled mess of deceit and betrayal. Poirot paused, his voice softening. "Guilt, Hastings. Guilt and fear have a way of twisting people's minds, and in the end, it is not always the crime itself that destroys. They are destroyed by the lies they tell." Sir Giles sat before Poirot, his shoulders hunched and his face ashen. It was clear that the weight of the truth had finally broken through his defenses. He had been a man of privilege, accustomed to playing with the rules, but now, with his crime laid bare, his bravado had evaporated. I didn't mean for it to go this far," Sir Giles confessed, his voice shaking. "Venetia's disappearance, it wasn't supposed to be a disappearance at all. She had become difficult. The debts, they were mounting, and the pressure, it became unbearable." Poirot gave a small, measured nod. "So, you staged her vanishing to ensure that her fortune would be yours. A clever move. But tell me, Sir Giles, how did you intend to get rid of her when she never truly disappeared?" Giles swallowed hard. "It was Lionel Chase, you see. He was the perfect scapegoat. I planted the tie-pin in his pocket, made sure to leave signs of his presence near the candelabrum. I thought that if I created enough confusion, people would believe him to be guilty, and the whole mess would be blamed on him. But it didn't work out the way I planned." Poirot tilted his head, studying the man with a mix of empathy and logic. "No, Sir Giles. Your plan was flawed from the beginning. You may have manipulated events, but the truth, it was always waiting to be uncovered." You're going to arrest me, aren't you?" Sir Giles whispered. Poirot smiled slightly. "Ah, mon ami, I shall not arrest you for murder. But for obstruction and fraud, yes. The law will take its course. The rest, the true guilt, is not for me to decide." With the confession hanging in the air, Poirot began to speak, his voice steady and measured. He had always been a man of method, his mind a labyrinth of calculation and intuition, and now he was about to pull the curtain back on the entire case. "You see, mon ami," Poirot began, addressing us all, "the crime was never as straightforward as it seemed. From the beginning, I knew there was more to the story than a simple disappearance." He gestured toward the table, where Sir Giles's confession still lay between us. The clues, they were small, like pieces of a puzzle, scattered across the scene. But you see, it was the behavior, the unconscious gestures, that told the real story. Poirot turned toward Lady Honoria first, his eyes narrowing as he recalled their earlier conversation. "You, madame, played the role of the grieving stepmother, but grief, it is rarely so controlled. You hid your emotions too well. The fear of exposure, it was written on your face every time I mentioned Lionel Chase." He then turned to Lionel Chase, who had grown paler by the second. "And you, monsieur, your confusion was not an act, but the nervous glance at the candelabra, the hesitation when I mentioned the sketch, these were not the actions of a man who had merely left the party early. You were trying to cover up a mistake." Poirot moved to Miss Lillian next. "Ah, mademoiselle, you followed Venetia, driven by jealousy, but you did not intend to hurt her. The guilt you felt, it betrayed you. The way you glanced at the wax on the floor, the way your hand trembled when you saw the candelabrum, it told me everything." "And Sir Giles," Poirot said, his eyes piercing, "you thought you could hide behind lies, but you too were a prisoner of your own fears, the fear of losing everything. You allowed your own guilt to shape your actions, thinking you could hide the truth under layers of deceit." Poirot's voice softened as he finished his monologue. "It was never the facts that caught you. It was your psychological responses, your inner conflicts. They left the trail for me to follow. Poirot moved slowly toward the candelabrum once again, his fingers brushing the edge where the wax had dripped. The room was lit softly, casting shadows that seemed to stretch like fingers across the walls. The candles, mon ami, they were not the key, Poirot said, as though unraveling a final mystery. It was how the candlelight was manipulated, how the shadows played upon the truth that allowed the guilt to surface. He turned toward us, his eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a puzzle solved. The candlelight, you see, was a distraction. The light could show us a portion of the truth, but it also concealed the rest. It allowed people to move, to act, unseen. When the candles flickered, people moved, leaving traces behind them. Poirot looked at each suspect, his gaze sharp. Venetia knew that the truth could be obscured by the light, which is why she left her clues in such a clever way. She knew that the shadows, the very thing that masked her plans, would eventually reveal everything. The clue in the wax, the shifting of the candelabra, and the way the shadows hid what was happening. That was the true revelation. Poirot gave a slight, satisfied smile. The candlelight did not merely illuminate, it was the veil that separated the truth from the lies. With the case solved, Poirot leaned back, his eyes closing for a moment, as though he were taking in the final breath of a completed symphony. The crime was never about the physical evidence, he said softly, almost to himself. It was about the psychology of the suspects, the web of emotions they wove for themselves. Fear, guilt, jealousy. These are the true culprits. Poirot opened his eyes and met each person's gaze. Each of you believed you were playing a game of deception, to cover your own secrets, to manipulate those around you. But in the end, you were caught in the illusion of your own making. He gestured to Sir Giles, Lady Honoria, and the others. Guilt twisted your minds, and fear distorted your judgment. You thought the truth would be buried, but it was never gone. It was always there, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Poirot's smile returned, his final words cutting through the room like a sharp blade. And so, mes amis, you have learned a most important lesson. No matter how deep you bury the truth, it will always find a way to rise to the surface. As Poirot's final words echoed in the room, I felt an overwhelming sense of awe. I had been with him through countless cases, but this was something else entirely. I had witnessed Poirot's ability to see patterns in the chaos, but never had he worked with such precision, extracting truth from so many twisted layers of deception. I found myself shaking my head, unable to hide my amazement. Poirot, I must say, I am speechless, I admitted, my voice almost apologetic. You've cracked this wide open with nothing more than small gestures, a flicker of light, and the most minute details that the rest of us would have missed entirely. Poirot's smile was modest, yet there was a glint of quiet satisfaction in his eyes. Ah, mon ami, it is always so. The truth lies not in grand clues or dramatic gestures. No, it is in the small things, the subtle gestures, the involuntary movements. These are the keys, the ones that unlock the door to understanding. I shook my head in disbelief. And all those lies, the clues were right there, all along. Yet you could see past them. Precisely, Hastings. Everyone lies, but not everyone lies well. It is the lies that are poorly constructed that reveal the most. I could hardly believe it, the sheer genius of his deductions. I was left standing in awe of a mind that could unravel such complex webs with so little evidence. Yet somehow, Poirot always saw the path where others could not. As we made our way toward the door, Poirot paused, casting a final look over the room, his expression softening. Well, mon ami, he said, with a playful twinkle in his eyes, I suppose the case is closed for now, but do not forget, it is always the small things that reveal the most. I raised an eyebrow, unsure where this was going. The small things? The flicker of a candle, the tremble of a hand, the way someone avoids a glance. It is these details that tell the truth, Poirot explained, as though he were imparting a timeless secret. In the end, it is the human soul that speaks through these tiny actions. It is always there if one knows how to listen. I couldn't help but chuckle, still in awe of his sharp insight. You make it sound so simple, Poirot. But I suspect that's the magic of your mind. Poirot smiled, a slight, satisfied smile. Ah, Hastings, magic is only another word for understanding. Just as we were about to step out into the crisp evening air, the door swung open again, and a final third letter slipped under it, its wax seal unmistakable, the same candle seal that had marked the earlier letters. Poirot paused, eyes narrowing as he picked it up with delicate fingers. The letter was unsigned, but the message was clear. The true mastermind may still be watching from the shadows. He looked up at me, his face unreadable. It seems, Hastings, the game is not yet finished. A shiver ran down my spine as Poirot tucked the letter into his pocket, his eyes never leaving the darkening horizon. As Poirot and I stood in the now quiet hall, the weight of the case finally lifted from our shoulders. It was clear to me that the true genius of Poirot's method lay not in the facts alone, but in his ability to see human nature in all its contradictions. From the smallest gesture to the slightest hesitation, he had unraveled a tangled web of lies, motives, and fear, revealing the truth where others had seen only confusion. The truth, Poirot said with a satisfied smile. It always comes to light, Hastings. Perhaps not immediately, but always. You see, the smallest of details, the ones we often overlook, will always betray the guilty conscience. I couldn't help but agree. Poirot had once again proven that no crime, no matter how cleverly disguised, could escape his observation. The truth, like light in the darkness, eventually finds its way through even the thickest of shadows. I looked at him with admiration. You make it seem so simple, Poirot. His smile widened. Ah, Hastings, it is simple. It only takes a little observation and a great deal of patience. Now that the mystery has been solved, I have one question for you, our keen-eyed audience. What do you think was the biggest clue that led Poirot to uncover the truth about Venetia's disappearance? Was it the candle wax, the shadows, or perhaps something else entirely? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this Hercule Poirot mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more thrilling detective stories to life every day. Stay tuned, because more of Poirot's brilliant mysteries are coming soon, and you won't want to miss a single one. Until next time, mes amis, keep observing, keep deducing, and remember, the truth is always just a clue away.